He was just a single dad, trying to fix a broken swing for his daughter. But he had no idea the woman quietly watching from the park bench was a lonely billionaire who was about to change his life forever. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment letting us know where in the world you're watching from. The autumn air in the small town of Havenwood had a crisp, golden edge, the kind that smelled of drying leaves and distant wood smoke. Liam Sterling breathed it in, the familiar scent, a small comfort in a life that had felt off balance for longer than he cared to admit. He stood at the edge of the community park, a place that had seen better days, its metal slide rusted at the seams and its sandbox more weeds than sand. His daughter, Maya, a whirlwind of boundless 8-year-old energy with her mother's wide, curious eyes, was pointing a small, accusing finger at the swing set. One of the swings hung limp and defeated, its chain snapped and coiled on the ground like a sleeping snake. "It's still broken, Daddy," she said, her voice laced with the kind of profound disappointment only a child can truly muster. Liam's chest tightened. It had been broken for weeks, another small sign of a town that had more heart than money, a place where things got patched up with duct tape and good intentions, but rarely truly fixed. He looked at Maya's face, the hope in her eyes, starting to wane, and he made a decision. It was a small thing, an almost insignificant thing in the grand scheme of his worries, the overdue utility bills, the dwindling pile of lumber in his workshop, the constant, low-grade hum of just barely getting by, but today, this one small thing felt like the most important thing in the world. He wasn't just a carpenter with calloused hands and a dusty workshop. He was her father, and fathers were supposed to be able to fix things. "I know, sweetheart," he said, his voice softer than he intended. "But you know what? I think we can fix that." He walked back to his old, dented pickup truck parked at the curb. Its blue paint faded to the color of a tired sky. From the cluttered bed, he pulled out his worn leather tool belt and a small wooden box containing an assortment of bolts, links, and clamps. He was always prepared. It was the one luxury a man in his position could afford. As he knelt in the dirt, the cold seeping through the knee of his jeans, he was unaware of the woman watching him from a solitary bench under the ancient oak tree. She was a ghost in a simple gray coat, her hair tucked under a dark beanie, her face partially obscured by the collar she'd pulled up against the chill. To anyone who glanced her way, she was just another local seeking a moment of quiet. But Serafina Vance was not a local. She was a phantom, an echo from a world of glass towers and hushed boardrooms. A world she had fled 3 weeks ago with nothing but a fake name, a rental car, and a profound emptiness that no amount of success had been able to fill. She watched the man work, his movements precise and unhurried. He wasn't performing for an audience. He was simply doing what needed to be done. He spoke quietly to his daughter, his words lost on the wind, but his tone was a language she understood. It was gentle, steady, a bulwark against the world's small, sharp disappointments. Serafina had seen men command stadiums, men who could move markets with a single word, but she had never seen anything that looked as strong as this man on his knees, patiently mending a broken chain for a little girl with bright, hopeful eyes. He didn't know it, but his simple act of kindness was a beacon in the fog of her life, and for the first time, in a very long time, she didn't feel the urge to run. She just wanted to stay and watch. Maya, however, was not one for quiet observation. Her curiosity was a living, breathing thing, and it often led her on adventures her father was still learning to navigate. While Liam was focused on tightening the last bolt on the newly repaired swing chain, his brow furrowed in concentration, Maya's attention had drifted to the solitary figure on the bench. She tilted her head, her pigtails swinging, and with the unself-conscious bravery of an 8-year-old, she marched across the damp grass. "Hi," she said, stopping a few feet from the bench. Serafina looked up, startled. She hadn't expected to be approached. In her world, people waited for introductions, for a clear signal that their presence was welcome. This little girl, with a smudge of dirt on her cheek and eyes the color of warm honey, operated by a different set of rules. "Hello there," Serafina replied. her voice a little rusty from disuse. Maya took another step closer. "Why do you look so sad?" The question was direct, guileless, and it struck Serafina with more force than any shareholder inquiry ever had. Sad? She wasn't sad. She was empty, disconnected, tired. But to this child, it all looked like sadness. Before she could formulate an answer, Liam stood up, wiping his hands on a rag he'd pulled from his back pocket. "Maya, sweetheart, don't bother the lady," he said, his voice a gentle chide as he walked over. He looked at Serafina, his expression a mixture of apology and weariness. "I'm sorry about that. She hasn't quite mastered the concept of personal space." Serafina managed a small smile, pulling her collar down slightly. "It's all right. She just asked a very good question." Liam's gaze lingered on her for a moment. He saw the simple coat, the worn beanie, but he also saw something else in her eyes, a depth, a stillness that seemed out of place in their small, bustling town. It was the look of someone who had seen too much of the world, or perhaps not enough of the right parts of it. "All done," he announced, turning back to the swing set. He tested it with his full weight, the chains groaning softly but holding firm. "Good as new. Well, almost." Maya's face lit up, the woman on the bench momentarily forgotten. She ran to the swing, her earlier disappointment replaced by pure, unadulterated joy. She scrambled onto the seat and looked back at them. "Can you push me, Daddy?" Then, her eyes shifted to Serafina. "You can push too if you want." "The sad lady?" Liam cringed slightly, but Serafina laughed. It was a real laugh, soft and unpracticed, and it seemed to surprise even her. "Maybe I will," she said, and for the first time, a genuine warmth touched her eyes. Liam watched the exchange, a strange feeling settling in his chest. He had fixed the swing, a simple mechanical task. But as he watched his daughter invite this quiet, sad-eyed stranger into their small circle of light, he had the distinct feeling that something far more complicated had just been set in motion. He didn't know her name, didn't know her story, but he could feel the weight she carried, a silence that was heavier than his own. He offered her a small, hesitant smile. "I'm Liam, by the way, and this is my co-foreman, Maya." Serafina met his gaze, and for a fleeting second, the wall around her seemed to crumble. "Sarah," she said. Just Sarah. The name hung in the air, simple and unadorned. A lie of omission that felt, in that moment, more honest than her real one ever had. Later that evening, Serafina sat in the sterile silence of the modern, glass-walled house she'd rented on the outskirts of Havenwood. The house was an architectural marvel, all clean lines and minimalist furniture, a fortress of quiet luxury she had paid a premium for under a corporate name that offered her complete anonymity. The irony was not lost on her. She had spent a decade building an empire, Kronos Corp, a tech giant that specialized in connectivity, in bringing the world closer together. She had become a master of the virtual, a titan of the digital age, celebrated on magazine covers and feared in boardrooms. And in the process, she had become the most disconnected person she knew. Her life had become a series of transactions. Relationships were networking opportunities. Conversations were strategic maneuvers. Kindness was a currency to be invested for a future return. She had fled her life in San Francisco, not because of a single scandal, but because of 1,000 tiny cuts. The slow, corrosive realization that she was the CEO of a company dedicated to human connection while being utterly, profoundly alone. She had picked Havenwood off a map, a random pinprick in a part of the country she had only ever flown over. She wanted quiet. She wanted to be invisible. She wanted to remember what it felt like to be a person, not a brand. The man in the park, Liam, he was everything her world was not. His hands were calloused, stained with the honest work of making and mending. His truck was old, his clothes were worn, but he moved with a purpose that felt more solid than any stock valuation. And the way he looked at his daughter, it was with a fierce, gentle love that felt ancient and elemental. He hadn't fixed that swing for recognition or praise. He had fixed it because it was broken and because it mattered to someone he loved. Serafina replayed the scene in her mind. Maya's unfiltered question. Liam's quiet competence. The simple offer to push a swing. It was a tableau of authenticity so raw it almost hurt to watch. In her world, problems weren't solved with a tool belt. They were delegated to teams of specialists, analyzed in focus groups, and resolved with a press release. Liam had simply knelt in the dirt and made something right again. She stood up and walked to the vast picture window, staring out at the dark silhouette of the trees against the twilight sky. The house was silent, save for the faint hum of the climate control system. She was safe here, hidden, but the emptiness was a palpable presence. The sadness the little girl had seen was real. It was the grief for a life she hadn't known she was missing. Until she saw it in a rundown park, in the form of a single dad with tired eyes and the strongest hands she had ever seen. For the first time, she wasn't just running from something. She was beginning to wonder if she might have accidentally run toward it. The next morning, the smell of sawdust was the first thing Liam noticed, a scent that was more home to him than coffee. His workshop, a converted barn behind his small rental house, was his sanctuary. It was cluttered and chaotic, but it was a space where he was in complete control, where wood and will could create something solid and beautiful. He ran a hand over a half-finished rocking horse, its curves smooth beneath his palm. The bills were piling up on his desk, a stack of white envelopes that felt heavier each day. A big commission had fallen through last month, and the small repair jobs he picked up around town were barely enough to cover groceries, let alone the rent. He was a good carpenter, one of the best in the county, but quality was a slow business in a world that favored fast and cheap. He pushed the thought away, focusing instead on the gentle rhythm of sanding. That's when Maya wandered in, still in her pajamas, clutching a piece of paper. "Daddy, I drew the sad lady," she announced, holding up a crayon sketch of a stick figure with a downturned mouth sitting on a bench. "Her name is Sarah," Liam corrected gently, a small smile touching his lips. He hadn't been able to shake the thought of the woman from the park. There was a quiet dignity about her, a resilience in her eyes that he recognized. It was the look of someone who had learned to weather storms alone. "Is she still sad?" Maya asked, her brow furrowed with genuine concern. "I don't know, sweet pea," Liam said. Maybe she was just having a quiet day, but he knew it was more than that. He had seen the way she flinched when he first spoke to her, the way she held herself as if bracing for a blow. It was the posture of loneliness, a condition he knew all too well. Ever since his wife, Anna, had passed away 3 years ago, a sudden illness stealing her from them like a thief in the night, his own world had felt muted. Grief was a constant, low hum beneath the surface of his life. He poured all of his energy, all of his love, into Maya, building a small, safe world for her with his own 2 hands. He didn't have time for sadness, not his own anyway. But seeing it reflected in a stranger's eyes had stirred something in him, a dormant empathy that felt both familiar and dangerous. He looked at Maya's drawing, at the simple, heartfelt rendering of a stranger's sorrow. His daughter had a heart that was wide open, a gift from her mother. It was his job to protect it, to keep it safe from a world that could be careless and cruel. But as he thought of Sarah, of her quiet gaze, and the surprising warmth of her laugh, he wondered if some connections weren't meant to be protected from, but rather leaned into. It was a fleeting thought, one he dismissed as he turned back to his work, but it lingered in the air with the sawdust, a question he wasn't yet ready to answer. Serafina told herself she wasn't looking for them. She was just taking a walk, exploring the town, getting some fresh air. It was a lie, and a poor one at that. She found herself back at the park, the midday sun filtering through the canopy of leaves, dappling the ground in shifting patterns of light. The park was empty, save for an elderly couple walking their dog. The swing set stood silent, the newly repaired chain glinting in the sun. She felt a pang of disappointment so sharp it surprised her. She was about to turn back when she heard the rhythmic sound of a hammer striking wood, coming from a side street just beyond the park. Drawn by the sound, she followed it to a small, unassuming house with a large, weathered barn out back. The barn doors were wide open, and inside she could see him, Liam. He was standing over a large piece of wood, a look of intense concentration on his face. He was reinforcing the main support beam of the old swing set, which he must have dismantled and brought back to his workshop. He was making it stronger, safer, not just patching it up. He was building it to last. She stood at the edge of the property, hesitant to intrude, but Maya spotted her from the doorway of the house. "Sarah!" the little girl squealed, running toward her with open arms. "You came back?" Liam looked up, his expression a mixture of surprise and something else she couldn't quite name. He wiped a sheen of sweat from his brow with the back of his arm, leaving a faint streak of sawdust. "Well, look who it is," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Couldn't stay away from the excitement of small-town infrastructure repair, huh?" Sarah smiled, a genuine warmth spreading through her chest. "Something like that. I was just on a walk." "Right," he said, a knowing glint in his eye. He gestured toward the massive wooden beam. "Figured if I was going to fix it, I might as well do." "Oh, it right." The whole frame was starting to rot. They fell into an easy conversation. He talked about the different types of wood, the satisfaction of turning something raw into something useful and beautiful. He spoke with a quiet passion, his hands moving as he described the process, the calluses and scars on them, a testament to a life spent creating. She asked him about his work, and he explained that he was a custom furniture maker, though lately he'd been taking on more handyman jobs to make ends meet. "What about you?" he asked, turning the question back to her. "What kind of work do you do?" She froze for a fraction of a second. "Oh, it's boring stuff," she deflected, the pre-rehearsed lie coming easily to her lips. "I'm a consultant, data management mostly. I can work from anywhere." It was technically true, in the way that calling the ocean damp was true. She managed data, entire continents of it, but the lie felt slick and ugly in her mouth, especially here, in this place of honest labor and raw wood. He nodded, accepting her answer without question. He didn't pry. He didn't seem to care about her job title or her professional life. He was just talking to her, person to person. It was both a profound relief and a source of deepening guilt. This feeling, this easy connection, was built on a foundation of deceit, and she knew, with a certainty that chilled her, that it couldn't last. But for now, standing in the sunlit doorway of his workshop, she allowed herself to pretend that it could. Maya, ever the social director, tugged on Serafina's hand. "Daddy made me a bird," she announced proudly, leading her into the fragrant chaos of the workshop. "He can make anything." On a workbench, littered with wood shavings and stray tools, sat a small, intricately carved wooden wren, its tiny feathers etched with painstaking detail. It was exquisite, a perfect, miniature life captured in a block of wood. Serafina picked it up, its weight solid and smooth in her palm. "It's beautiful, Maya," she said, her voice soft with genuine admiration. Liam leaned against a support beam, watching them. A faint blush crept up his neck. "It's just a little something I whittled for her. Keeps my hands busy in the evenings." "You have a real gift, Liam," Serafina said, meeting his eyes over Maya's head. He shrugged, looking down at his dusty boots. "My wife, Anna, she was the real artist, a painter. She could see the color in everything." "After she was gone," he trailed off, the air growing heavy with unspoken grief. "I started carving. It felt like the only way I could still make something beautiful in a world that had suddenly gone gray." Serafina's heart ached for him. It was the first time he'd mentioned his wife, and the vulnerability in his admission was a quiet offering of trust. She felt a sudden, fierce desire to offer something true in return, but the words wouldn't come. What could she say? That her own world was gray not from loss but from a soul-crushing excess? That her biggest struggle was escaping a life of gilded emptiness? Her problems felt pathetic and trivial in the face of his quiet, dignified sorrow. Instead, she just nodded, holding the small wooden bird a little tighter. "She would have loved this," Serafina said softly. And in that moment, a fragile bridge formed between them, built not on words, but on a shared understanding of what it meant to find beauty in the broken places. Liam seemed to sense her unspoken empathy, and a small, grateful smile touched his lips. He changed the subject, pointing to a set of half-finished chairs in the corner, his voice regaining its steady, practical tone. The moment of raw vulnerability had passed, but its echo remained, a new layer of intimacy settling between them, as Maya chattered on, completely unaware of the delicate, invisible thing that had just been woven in the air of the sawdust-scented workshop. As the afternoon light began to fade, casting long shadows across the workshop floor, Serafina knew she should leave. She had already stayed longer than she intended, drawn into their small, warm world. "I'm staying at a friend's rental just on the other side of town," she said, the lie feeling heavier now, more concrete. "It's quiet, which is what I needed." In reality, the rental was a sprawling, multi-million-dollar estate she had purchased sight unseen through a shell corporation, a place so isolated and secure that no one from her old life could ever find her. The guilt was a sharp, unpleasant tang in her mouth. She was building this fragile connection on a lie, and every genuine smile from Liam, every trusting glance from Maya, made the eventual collapse feel more and more certain. But the thought of telling him the truth was terrifying. The moment she said the name Serafina Vance, she would cease to be Sarah, the quiet consultant. She would become a headline, a net worth, a brand. He would look at her differently. Everyone did. "Well, if you need anything, directions or a recommendation for the best coffee in town, which isn't saying much, just let me know," Liam offered, his sincerity making her feel even worse. "Actually," Maya piped up, her eyes bright with a new idea, "we should show you the ice cream shop. Daddy says it has the best mint chip in the whole world." Liam chuckled. "I think I said in the whole county, sweet pea." He looked at Serafina, a question in his eyes. "We were just about to walk down. If you're not busy." Busy. The word was a joke. Her days were a vast, empty expanse of time she was desperately trying to fill. "I'm not busy," she said, a real smile breaking through her anxiety. "I'd love to." The walk into town was a revelation. Havenwood's Main Street was a postcard of small-town America, with its brick-fronted buildings, a barber shop with a spinning pole, and a hardware store with a dog sleeping on the welcome mat. But it was more than the aesthetics, it was the people. Liam seemed to know everyone. He exchanged a nod with the mailman, a wave with the woman arranging flowers in a shop window, and a friendly greeting with Mr. Henderson, the elderly owner of the hardware store. "Liam, that new shelf you built for the back room is solid as a rock," Mr. Henderson called out. "Anna would have been proud of that joinery." Liam's smile tightened at the mention of his wife, but he nodded his thanks. Serafina watched these simple, easy interactions with a sense of wonder. This was a community, a real, interconnected web of lives. People knew his name, they knew his work, they knew his history. She, on the other hand, moved through the world like a ghost, her connections mediated through assistants and encrypted emails. She was known of by millions, but she wasn't truly known by anyone. As they stepped into the sweet, cold air of the ice cream parlor, the teenage girl behind the counter grinned. "Hey, Liam. The usual for Maya?" "You know it," Liam said, lifting Maya onto a stool. Serafina felt a pang of something she couldn't envy, perhaps, or a deep, aching loneliness. She was an observer, an outsider, looking in on a life that felt more authentic than anything she had ever experienced. When Liam turned to her and asked what she wanted, she just stared at the tubs of colorful ice cream, momentarily overwhelmed. It was such a simple choice, but for the first time in a long time, it felt like it mattered. It felt real. Maya, with her uncanny ability to cut through adult complexities, made the decision for her. "She wants strawberry," she announced with authority. "It's a happy color, and she needs more happy." Liam and Serafina exchanged a look over Maya's head, a silent acknowledgement of the small, profound truth his daughter had just spoken. And as Serafina took the cone, the cold sweetness a shock to her senses. She felt a flicker of that happiness, fragile and fleeting, but undeniably there. The invitation to the workshop came from Maya, of course. "You have to see where Daddy makes the magic happen," she had insisted after their ice cream adventure. Liam had looked hesitant, his workshop being his most private space, a place of both solace and struggle. But Maya's enthusiasm was a force of nature, and he found himself agreeing before he could second-guess it. When Serafina stepped over the threshold, she felt like she was crossing into another dimension. The air was thick with the rich, earthy scent of pine, oak, and cedar. Sunlight streamed through a high, dusty window, illuminating millions of dancing dust motes. Tools of every shape and size hung from the walls in a state of organized chaos-skizzles, saws, planes, and clamps, each one worn smooth with use. It was the absolute antithesis of her world, the sterile, silent expanse of her office at Kronos Corp, where the only texture was the cool gleam of glass and brushed steel. She ran a hand over a stack of raw lumber, the rough grain a welcome friction against her skin. "This is incredible," she said, her voice hushed with reverence. Liam was standing by his workbench, a faint flush of pride on his cheeks. "It's messy," he said, a touch of apology in his tone. "So is the creative process," she replied, her eyes scanning the room. She saw more than just a workspace. She saw a life. She saw the half-finished projects that spoke of hope and the pile of discarded scraps that spoke of frustration. She saw a child's crayon drawings taped to a cabinet and a faded photograph of a smiling woman, Anna, she presumed tucked into a corner. This place had a soul. It was a stark contrast to her own life, which felt increasingly like a series of perfectly executed, soulless transactions. Liam watched her, a small, curious smile on his face. He was used to people seeing his work, but not like this. Most clients saw the finished product, the polished table, or the sturdy chair. They didn't see the sweat, the sawdust, the hours of patient labor that went into it. Sarah, however, seemed to see the process, the heart of it all. He found himself wanting to show her more, to share this part of himself that he rarely revealed. "I'm working on something for Maya's birthday," he said, his voice a little lower, more intimate. He led her to a corner of the workshop that was draped with a canvas cloth. He pulled it back, revealing a partially assembled wooden music box. It was a marvel of intricate craftsmanship. Tiny, hand-carved animals, a fox, a bear. A deer were designed to rotate on a small platform. The woodwork was seamless, the details so fine they seemed impossible. Serafina stared at it, her breath catching in her throat. It was the most beautiful, heartfelt thing she had ever seen. In her world, gifts were extravagant and impersonal. Rare vintage of wine, a limited edition watch, a donation made in someone's name. They were gestures of status, not love. This music box, however, was a testament to time, patience, and a father's devotion. It was a physical manifestation of love. "Liam, it's breathtaking," she whispered, reaching out to touch the smooth surface of the carved bear. "It's not done yet," he said almost shyly. "The mechanism is tricky. But I wanted to play her favorite lullaby, the one Anna used to sing to her." As he spoke about the project, his face lit up with a passion and a tenderness that made Serafina's chest ache. This was what she had been missing. Not just love, but the act of creation born from it. Standing there in the golden, dusty light of his workshop, surrounded by the smell of real work and the evidence of a life built with purpose, she felt the full, crushing weight of her own artifice. She was Sarah, the data consultant, a simple, flimsy lie that was growing more complicated by the minute. She wanted to tell him everything, but the fear of seeing the warmth in his eyes curdle into disappointment, or worse, pity, kept her silent. The first anonymous gift was subtle, almost forgettable. Maya had a favorite sketchbook, a cheap, spiral-bound pad from the local pharmacy. Its pages were filled with lopsided animals, fantastical castles, and portraits of her father with a superhero cape. She carried it everywhere, its cover soft and dog-eared, its pages smudged with a rainbow of crayon and graphite. Then, one afternoon at the park, it disappeared. They searched everywhere, under the slide, behind the benches, in the tall grass by the creek, but it was gone. Maya was heartbroken, her tears silent but steady. Liam's chest ached with a familiar feeling of helplessness. It was just a sketchbook, but to Maya it was a world. He promised her a new one, but he knew it wouldn't be the same. 3 days later, a package appeared on their front porch. It was a simple brown box with no return address. Liam opened it cautiously. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a beautiful leather-bound sketchbook. Its pages were thick and creamy, the kind real artists used. The leather was soft and smelled of quality. Tucked inside the front cover was a small typed note. For the artist, the world needs your pictures. Maya's gasp was a sound of pure wonder. She hugged the sketchbook to her chest, her earlier grief dissolving into pure joy. Liam, however, felt a knot of unease. Who would do this? He didn't know anyone with the money for a gift like this, let alone the inclination to leave it anonymously. He thought briefly of Sarah. She was the only new person in their lives. But he dismissed the thought. She was a consultant, she'd said. She seemed as grounded and simple as anyone else in Havenwood. He assumed it was a misplaced delivery, or a kind gesture from someone at their church who had heard about the lost sketchbook. He let the mystery go, choosing to focus on the delight in his daughter's eyes. But the seed of a question had been planted. Later that week, Serafina found another reason to visit the workshop. She came bearing a peace offering, 2 large pizzas in cardboard boxes. "I was in town and ordered way too much," she said with a casual shrug, a lie that was becoming second nature to her. In reality, she'd had her assistant order them from the best place in the next county over and arrange for a discreet delivery to a pickup point. Liam raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. The smell of hot cheese and pepperoni was too tempting to refuse. They ate, sitting on overturned buckets in the workshop, the pizza boxes balanced on a workbench. The setting was humble, but the conversation was rich. They talked for hours, the easy intimacy between them growing stronger. Serafina found herself opening up in a way she never had before. She spoke of the pressures of her job, carefully omitting the scale and specifics, but conveying the soul-crushing weight of endless expectations. She talked about feeling like a character in her own life, always playing a part. Liam listened, his gaze steady and non-judgmental. He spoke about the loneliness of being a single parent, the quiet fear that he wasn't enough for Maya. He confessed his worry about the future, about his struggling business. "But then I come in here," he said, gesturing around the workshop, "and I can make something real, something that will last longer than I will, and that helps." Serafina looked at him, at his strong, capable hands, at the honesty in his tired eyes, and she felt a powerful, dangerous pull. This was real. This man, this place, this moment. It was a fragile bubble of authenticity in her carefully constructed life of lies, and she found herself terrified of it popping. As they talked, her phone buzzed on the workbench beside her. The screen lit up with a cascade of notifications, the sleek, minimalist interface of the encrypted Kronos Corp app, a stark contrast to the rustic surroundings. Liam's eyes flickered to the screen for just a second, a brief, questioning glance. Serafina's heart leaped into her throat. She quickly silenced the phone, flipping it over. "Sorry," she mumbled. "Work stuff. It never stops." He nodded, but a subtle shift had occurred. A flicker of doubt had entered his eyes. He didn't say anything, but the easy flow of their conversation had been momentarily disrupted. A crack had appeared in her carefully crafted persona, and she knew, with a sinking feeling, that it was only a matter of time before the whole facade came crashing down. The incident with the phone had been a close call, a stark reminder of how precarious her double life was. Serafina became more careful, more vigilant. She started leaving her work phone in the car, relying on a cheap anonymous burner phone for her sparse communications. The near miss, however, had also made her bold. The more time she spent with Liam and Maya, the more she wanted to be part of their world, even if it was just for a little while. She found herself looking for ways to help, to ease the burdens she saw him carrying so stoically. It started with small things. She'd bring by coffee, claiming she'd bought an extra. She'd pick up a bag of specialty lumber she knew he needed from a supplier 2 towns over, pretending she'd been in the area for a consulting meeting. Each gesture was wrapped in a plausible lie, a way for her to give without revealing the depth of her resources. Then, the table saw broke. It was Liam's most vital piece of equipment, an old hulking machine that had been the heart of his workshop for over a decade. It died with a shudder and a shower of sparks, its motor finally giving out. Liam stood over it, his face grim. A replacement would cost thousands of dollars he didn't have. It was a devastating blow, one that threatened to shut down his business for good. He didn't tell Sarah how bad it was, but she saw it in the slump of his shoulders, in the new lines of worry etched around his eyes. A week passed. Liam spent his days trying to find a used motor he could afford, calling in favors, his hope dwindling with each dead end. Then, one morning, a large delivery truck rumbled up to his workshop. 2 men unloaded a brand-new state-of-the-art cabinet saw, the kind he had only ever seen in magazines. It was a thing of beauty and power, far beyond anything he could have dreamed of owning. The delivery slip was simple. Paid in full, from a friend. There was no other name, no company logo. But Liam knew. His heart sank, even as a part of him soared. This was too much. This wasn't a sketchbook or a pizza. This was a lifeline, a gift so significant it felt like a weight. That evening, he drove to her house, the rental she had pointed out once. He found her sitting on the porch, reading a book. He walked up the path, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, his posture rigid. "The saw arrived," he said, his voice flat. Sarah looked up, her expression carefully neutral. "Oh?" "Don't, Sarah," he said, the words tight. "Don't pretend you don't know. Who are you?" She closed her book, her knuckles white. "What do you mean? A new saw like that doesn't just appear. Leather sketchbooks don't fall from the sky. You're not just a consultant, are you?" His voice wasn't angry, it was hurt. It was the voice of a man whose trust had been shaken. "I don't need saving, Sarah. I don't want your charity." "It's not charity," she said, her voice trembling slightly. I have some connections. I called in a favor. I wanted to help." The lie was weaker this time, stretched thin by the scale of the gift. He stared at her, a long, searching look. He wanted to believe her. He wanted the simplicity of their connection to be real. But the evidence was mounting, and the saw in his workshop felt less like a gift and more like a symbol of the vast, invisible chasm between their lives. "I can't accept it," he said finally. "I'll find a way to pay you back." He turned and walked away before she could say another word, leaving her alone on the porch with her book and her lies, the space between them now filled with the uncomfortable silence of a truth half told. The tension after the confrontation about the saw was a constant, low hum between them. Liam tried to keep his distance, to re-establish the boundaries that had been so beautifully blurred. He focused on his work, throwing himself into projects with a grim determination. He even tried to find a way to finance the saw himself, to send her payments, but he knew it was a futile gesture. He couldn't shake her, and he wasn't sure he wanted to. She kept showing up, not with gifts, but with her presence. She'd bring Maya home from the park or sit quietly in the workshop, reading a book while he worked, offering a comfortable silence that was more intimate than conversation. One evening, as a soft rain began to fall, they found themselves alone on the porch of his small house. Maya was asleep inside. The air was cool and smelled of wet earth. "I'm sorry," she said, breaking the silence. "About the saw. I overstepped. I didn't know how else to help." Liam sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's not that I'm not grateful, Sarah. It's just, it makes me feel like I have nothing to offer." "You're wrong," she said, her voice fierce. She turned to face him, her eyes shining in the dim porch light. "You have everything to offer. You have this, She gestured toward the house, the workshop, the quiet life he had built. You have purpose. You make things that are real and beautiful. Do you have any idea how rare that is? He stared at her, taken aback by her intensity. The air between them crackled with unspoken emotions. The rain fell harder, a steady rhythm that seemed to be washing away their defenses. "You don't even know me," he whispered. "I know enough," she replied, her voice softening. She took a hesitant step closer. The space between them shrank until he could feel the warmth radiating from her, see the rain clinging to her eyelashes, and then he couldn't stop himself. He leaned in and kissed her. It was a kiss, born of weeks of pent-up emotion, gratitude, frustration, confusion, and a deep, undeniable longing. It was gentle at first, then deepened as she responded, her hands coming up to cup his face. It was a kiss that felt like a confession, an admission of a connection that had grown too strong to ignore. In that moment, under the shelter of the porch with the rain drumming a soft rhythm around them, the lies and the secrets and the differences between their worlds all melted away. There was only this: the solid feel of her in his arms, the taste of rain on her lips, and the terrifying, exhilarating feeling of hope. The kiss changed everything. The fragile bubble of their connection had not popped. It had solidified, transforming into something with weight and substance. But with that substance came a new set of fears. For Liam, the hope that bloomed in his chest was terrifying. He hadn't allowed himself to feel this way about anyone since Anna. To open himself up to love again felt like a betrayal of his grief, and worse, a risk he wasn't sure he could afford to take with his heart, or with Maya's. He found himself more guarded in some ways, pulling back slightly whenever things felt too intense, a subconscious defense mechanism against a happiness he didn't fully trust. For Serafina, the joy of the kiss was immediately shadowed by the crushing weight of her secret. The lie was no longer a small protective shield. It was a massive, load-bearing wall in the foundation of their burgeoning relationship. Every moment of shared laughter, every intimate conversation, felt both precious and poisoned. How could she build a future on a lie? The thought of telling him the truth was a constant, low-grade panic. She imagined the scene over and over, the shock in his eyes, the inevitable question of why, the potential for his gentle respect to curdle into resentment or mistrust. He valued honesty and authenticity above all else. It was what had drawn her to him in the first place. Her deception was a betrayal of the very qualities she admired in him. The tension came to a head in the most mundane of places, the local grocery store. They had gone together, a simple, domestic act that felt revolutionary to Serafina. As they stood in the checkout line, Liam's card was declined. It was a small, humiliating moment, his face flushing as he fumbled for the cash he knew wasn't there. Without a thought, Serafina pulled out her own carda. Sleek, black, anonymous-looking carded, paid before he could protest. "Don't," he said, his voice low and tight as they walked to the car. "I had it." "I know," she said gently. "But it was easier this way." "Easier? For who?" He shot back, the frustration of his financial struggles and the unease about her mysterious resources boiling over. "Sarah, I need to know who you are. This isn't just about a saw or a grocery bill. It's about trust." Serafina's heart pounded. This was it, the moment she had been dreading. But looking at the hurt and confusion in his eyes, she couldn't bring herself to do it. "Not here, not like this. Let's just go home, Liam," she pleaded. "We can talk later." He nodded, but the silence in the car was heavy and cold. The unspoken truth sat between them like a ghost, and they both knew that later couldn't be put off for much longer. The end came, as it often does, not with a bang, but with the quiet click of a mouse. A freelance journalist in a town 2 counties over, intrigued by the delivery of a high-end industrial saw to a small, struggling workshop, started digging. It didn't take long. A few calls, a search of property records under shell corporations, a cross-reference with a list of high-profile tech executives on leave. The story broke on a popular tech blog, the headline sensational and brutal. Vanished Vance. Tech billionaire Serafina Vance, found hiding in rural obscurity, playing house with local carpenter. The article was a masterpiece of insinuation and conjecture. It painted Serafina as an eccentric, unstable heiress running from her responsibilities. It painted Liam as a naive pawn, or, worse, a cunning opportunist. But the most damning part was the photo. A long-lens shot, taken from a distance, of him and Sarah kissing on his porch in the rain. It was a private, beautiful moment, now stolen and twisted into a public spectacle. Liam saw it when the owner of the local diner, a kind woman named Carol, pulled him aside and showed him the article on her phone, her expression full of pity. He stared at the screen, at the name Serafina Vance, the title CEO of Kronos Corp., the estimated net worth that had more commas than he could comprehend. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The woman he had been falling in love with, the quiet, sad-eyed consultant, didn't exist. She was a fiction. The blood drained from his face. It wasn't the money. He could have dealt with the money. It was the scale of the deception. The saw, the sketchbook, the pizzas, the rental house-every single moment of their time together was suddenly cast in a new, distorted light. It felt like a violation. He had opened his home, his heart, and his daughter's life to a lie. He walked out of the diner, the sympathetic murmurs of the other patrons following him like a shroud. He didn't know what he felt: anger, humiliation, a profound, soul-deep hurt. He just knew that the fragile, real thing he thought he had found was an illusion, and he was the fool who had believed in it. Serafina raced to his workshop, her heart pounding with a sickening dread. She had seen the article. Her phone had been exploding for hours. She found him standing in the middle of the room, surrounded by the beautiful, solid things he had built, looking utterly lost. "Liam," she began, her voice shaking. "I can explain." "Explain what?" he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Explain that your name isn't Sarah? That you're not a data consultant? That you're one of the richest women in the world? I think the internet did a pretty good job of explaining it for you." "It's not what you think," she pleaded, taking a step toward him. "Don't," he said, holding up a hand. He wouldn't look at her. Was any of it real? Or was I just some rustic experiment? A little blue-collar curiosity to break up the boredom of being a billionaire? "No, Liam, that's not true," she cried, tears streaming down her face. "You and Maya, you were the only real things in my life." "Real?" He let out a harsh, bitter laugh. "Nothing about you is real. I let you into my life. I let you get close to my daughter." His voice broke on the last word. "She loves you, Sarah. Or whoever you are. And now I have to tell her that you're just another person who's going to disappear." "I don't have to disappear," she whispered. "We can fix this." "There's nothing to fix," he said, his voice hardening into something she didn't recognize. He finally looked at her, and his eyes were cold and empty. "I want you to leave. Leave my house, leave my town, and stay away from my daughter. We have enough broken things in our lives. We don't need another." He turned his back on her, a final, unbreachable wall. Serafina stood there for a long moment, the sobs catching in her throat, before she finally turned and walked out of the workshop, the smell of sawdust and betrayal clinging to her as the life she had just started to build crumbled into dust around her. The fallout was immediate and brutal. For Serafina, it was a return to a gilded cage, but this time the bars felt colder, sharper. The board of Kronos Corp summoned her to an emergency meeting in San Francisco. She sat at the head of a massive mahogany table, the same seat she had occupied 1,000 times before, but she felt like a stranger. They didn't care about her reasons for leaving. They cared about brand integrity and shareholder confidence. The questions were relentless, a barrage of corporate speak and veiled accusations. She was no longer a person. She was a liability. She retreated into a shell of cold professionalism, her answers clipped and emotionless, giving them the composed, unflappable CEO they wanted, while inside she was shattering. She moved back into her penthouse apartment, a sterile expanse of glass and white marble overlooking the city. The silence was deafening, a stark contrast to the warm, cluttered chaos of Liam's workshop. Every corner of the apartment reminded her of her isolation, of the life she had tasted and lost. For Liam, the aftermath was a different kind of hell. Havenwood, once his sanctuary, became a fishbowl. The story had turned him into a local celebrity of the worst kind. Reporters showed up, their vans parked discreetly down the street, their long-lensed cameras capturing him, taking out the trash or walking Maya to the bus stop. Strangers drove by his workshop slowly, pointing. The townspeople were divided. Some offered sympathetic glances, while others looked at him with a new, unwelcome curiosity, as if he were a character in a soap opera. His quiet, predictable life had been irrevocably broken. He tried to shield Maya from the worst of it, but she was a perceptive child. She saw the whispers, the cameras, the sadness that had settled back into her father's eyes, deeper than before. "Is Sarah ever coming back?" she asked one night, her voice small. Liam's heart broke. "I don't think so, sweet pea," he said, the words tasting like ash. He threw himself into his work, the workshop becoming his only refuge. He worked late into the night, the rhythmic scrape of a hand plane and the scent of cedar his only companions. He was trying to build a wall of routine and labor around his pain, but it was a flimsy defense. Every time he looked at the new table saw, he felt a fresh wave of humiliation and loss. He had lost more than just a woman he was falling for. He had lost the belief that something better was possible. He had let hope in, and it had left a bigger hole than the grief he had been nursing for years. Both of them were adrift in their separate, lonely worlds, haunted by the ghost of a connection that had felt too real to be true. Days bled into weeks. Serafina went through the motions of her old life, a ghost in expensive clothing. She attended meetings, signed documents, and gave hollow, scripted interviews to quell the media storm. Her board was placated by her return to form, but they couldn't see the emptiness behind her eyes. She had her empire back, but she had lost the only thing that made her feel human. She found herself staring out her penthouse window for hours, not at the glittering cityscape, but at the memory of a small town, a dusty workshop, and a little girl with honey-colored eyes. She missed the smell of sawdust. She missed the taste of burnt ice cream from a local shop. She missed the sound of Liam's quiet, steady voice. The world she had built for herself felt like a prison of her own making, and the key, she realized with an aching certainty, was hundreds of miles away in a town she had no right to return to. Meanwhile, in Havenwood, Liam was fighting his own quiet battle. The media attention had mostly died down, but the wound remained raw. He avoided going into town unless absolutely necessary, the feeling of being watched still clinging to him. His work was his only solace, but even that was tinged with sadness. The workshop felt too quiet, too big. He kept expecting to see Sarah walk in with a smile and a bad excuse for bringing coffee. Maya had grown quieter, too. She still drew, but her pictures lacked their usual vibrant energy. One evening, as Liam was putting her to bed, she looked up at him with an old-soul gravity. "Daddy," she said, "I think you were scared." Liam paused. "Scared of what, honey?" "Of being happy," she said simply. "Mommy used to say that sometimes people get so used to the rain they forget how to stand in the sun." The words, so simple and so profoundly true, hit Liam like a physical blow. He had pushed Sarah away not just because she had lied, but because he was terrified of the happiness she represented. He was scared of losing someone again, so he had chosen to lose her on his own terms. He had chosen the familiar pain of loneliness over the terrifying vulnerability of joy. He sat on the edge of Maya's bed long after she had fallen asleep, the weight of his daughter's wisdom settling in his heart. He had been trying to protect her, but in reality, he had been protecting himself from a chance at a life he had stopped believing he deserved. His fear had cost them all. The catalyst for change arrived in a small, square, cardboard box. It appeared one afternoon on the gleaming, sterile reception desk of Kronos Corp., a humble brown package amidst a sea of sleek corporate courier envelopes. The return address was simply Havenwood. Serafina's assistant, trained to screen all packages for security, almost discarded it. But something about the simple, handwritten address made her pause. She brought it to Serafina's office. "This came for you," she said, placing it on the vast glass desk. "It's probably nothing." But Serafina knew it was something. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she carefully sliced open the tape. Inside, nestled in a bed of wood shavings that smelled faintly of cedar, was the music box. It was finished now, polished to a soft gleam. The tiny carved animals stood in a circle, their wooden forms imbued with a life and a love that felt almost sacred. A small folded note was tucked beside it. With trembling hands, she opened it. The note wasn't from Liam. The handwriting was a child's careful, earnest printing. It said, "Daddy finished it. He said it was a promise. He misses you. I miss you too, Maya." Serafina turned the small crank on the side of the box. A delicate, heartbreakingly familiar melody filled the silent office. It was the lullaby she had heard Maya humming, the one Liam had said his wife used to sing. The simple, pure notes cut through the layers of corporate armor she had rebuilt around herself, striking at the very core of her being. The tears she had been holding back for weeks finally came, hot and unstoppable. She sat there in her $1,000,000 office, the city glittering below, and wept. She wept for the lies she had told, for the fear that had driven them apart, and for the beautiful, real thing she had been too cowardly to fight for. This music box wasn't just a gift, it was a message. It was a piece of the world she had foolishly walked away from. It was a reminder of what was real, what mattered. Clutching the small wooden box to her chest, she made a decision. She was done being a ghost. She was done letting fear write her story. She buzzed her assistant. "Cancel my afternoon," she said, her voice thick but steady. "And get my car. I have to go home." She didn't mean the penthouse. Inspired by the simple, profound honesty of the music box, Serafina walked into the emergency board meeting the next day with a clarity she hadn't felt in years. She didn't come to apologize or to make excuses. She came to take back her life. "For the past decade," she began, her voice calm and steady, silencing the room, "Kronos Corp has been a leader in digital innovation. We've built platforms, algorithms, and networks. But we've forgotten what we're connecting: people." She looked around the table, at the faces of the men and women who had valued stock prices over soul. "I'm not interested in building a bigger, faster, more profitable machine anymore. I'm interested in building a better world." She outlined a new, radical vision. She announced the launch of the Vance Foundation, a new philanthropic arm of the company, funded by a significant portion of her own shares. Its mission wouldn't be to write large checks to established charities. It would be to provide direct, no-strings-attached grants to small businesses, artisans, and community projects, the very fabric of places like Havenwood. It would fund the fixers, the builders, the creators. "We're going to invest in authenticity," she declared. "We're going to help people build things that last." The board was stunned into silence. This was not the CEO they knew. This was a visionary, a leader with a purpose that went beyond the bottom line. It was a massive gamble, but her conviction was unshakable. For the first time, she wasn't just managing an empire, she was leading it. Her first act as the head of the new foundation was to discreetly arrange a grant for the Havenwood Community Park Revitalization Project. There was no press release, no photo op. Just a quiet transfer of funds that would ensure the swings would never be broken again. Then, she got in a simple, nondescript rental car and drove. She didn't know if he would see her, if he would even speak to her, but she knew she had to try. She found him where it all began, at the park. He was sitting on the bench under the old oak tree, the same one she had occupied on that first day. He was watching Maya on the newly repaired swing. a small, sad smile on his face. Serafina got out of the car and walked slowly toward him, her heart in her throat. He saw her coming, and his expression hardened, the walls going up instantly. She stopped a few feet away, giving him space. The air was thick with unspoken hurt. "I got the music box," she said, her voice barely a whisper. He just nodded, his gaze fixed on his daughter. "Liam, I'm sorry," she said, the words feeling inadequate. "Not just for the lie. I'm sorry for being a coward. You were right. I was scared. But I'm not anymore." He finally looked at her, his eyes searching her face. "What do you want, Sarah?" "A second chance," she said, her voice gaining strength. "Not to go back to what we were, but to start over. For real this time. No secrets, no lies. Just us." Maya, seeing her, leaped off the swing and ran toward them, a bright, hopeful smile on her face. "Sarah, you came back," she cried, throwing her arms around Serafina's legs. Serafina knelt and hugged her tightly, her eyes never leaving Liam's. "I did," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I came home." Liam watched them, the wall inside him beginning to crumble. He saw the genuine love in Serafina's eyes as she held his daughter. He saw the woman who had sent a new table saw, who had remembered a lullaby, who had come back not with excuses, but with a plea for a real beginning. The fear was still there, a low hum in the back of his mind, but for the first time it was quieter than the hope. He took a hesitant step forward, closing the distance between them. The beginning of their new life was slow and deliberate, built on a foundation of painstaking honesty. There were no grand gestures, no sweeping romantic declarations. There was coffee on his porch in the early morning light, where she told him about the pressures of her board, and he told her about the grain of a particular piece of maple. There were long walks through Havenwood, where the townspeople, seeing her there day after day, not as a fleeting spectacle, but as a quiet presence, slowly began to treat her as one of their own. She didn't save him. That was the crucial difference. He didn't need saving. Instead, she became his partner. The Vance Foundation's first official project was the restoration of Havenwood's historic community center, a beautiful old building that had fallen into disrepair. They didn't hire a big city firm. Serafina commissioned Liam to lead the project, not as an act of charity, but as a recognition of his skill. He wasn't her employee. He was the head artisan. She worked alongside him, not with a hammer, but with a laptop and a phone, securing permits, sourcing sustainable materials, and managing the budget. They spent their days in a cloud of sawdust and planning, their evenings on his porch, tired and fulfilled. She saw the pride in his eyes as he brought the old building back to life, his hands creating beauty from neglect. He saw the fire in her as she used her power not for profit but for purpose, her sharp mind and relentless drive now focused on something that mattered. Maya was the glue that held them together, her easy acceptance of Sarah a constant, gentle reminder of what they were fighting for. She would spend her afternoons at the community center, helping. By organizing wood scraps or drawing pictures of the crew, her laughter echoing through the cavernous space. One afternoon, as they stood watching the sunset paint the new windows of the center in shades of orange and pink, Liam took her hand. It was a simple, solid gesture. "I was wrong," he said quietly. "About what?" she asked. "I thought our worlds couldn't fit together, but I was trying to fit you into my world, and you were trying to fit me into yours." He looked at her, his eyes full of a love that was steady and sure. "We're not supposed to fit. We're supposed to build something new, together." She leaned her head on his shoulder, her heart full. "I like what we're building," she whispered. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was better. It was real. And it was theirs. A few months later, the Havenwood Community Center held its grand reopening. The entire town turned out. The air was filled with the sound of a local bluegrass band, the smell of barbecue, and the happy chatter of a community reborn. Liam stood near the entrance, a simple plaque on the wall beside him. Restored by the artisans of Havenwood. Led by Liam Sterling. He wasn't in the spotlight. He was part of the foundation. Serafina was there, not as a CEO giving a speech, but as a member of the community, laughing with Carol from the diner and helping Mr. Henderson with his plate. She wore a simple dress and a smile that was genuine and unguarded. Maya darted through the crowd, her face alight with joy, showing her friends the new reading nook Liam had built, its shelves filled with books donated by the Vance Foundation. Later, as the party wound down, the three of them stood on the newly finished veranda, looking out at the town square. Now, aglow with strings of fairy lights. "It's beautiful," Serafina said, slipping her hand into Liam's. "You made it beautiful." "We did," he corrected, squeezing her hand. He looked down at Maya, who was leaning sleepily against his legs. "This is what you were talking about, isn't it?" Serafina asked softly. "Building something that lasts?" "Yeah," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "This is it." He had learned that strength wasn't about building walls to keep the world out. It was about having the courage to let the right person in. And she had learned that a home wasn't a place you could buy. It was a feeling you built with the people who saw you, truly saw you, and loved you anyway. The journey hadn't been easy, but standing here, together, under the soft glow of the lights in the town that had become their home, they knew they had built something far more valuable than a community center. They had built a family. The epilogue of their story was written not in headlines, but in quiet, everyday moments. It was written in the way Serafina learned to tell the difference between a dovetail and a mortise and tenon joint. It was written in the way Liam finally allowed himself to take a vacation, a simple camping trip to the coast where they taught Maya how to skip stones across the water. It was written in the laughter that now filled his workshop, which had been expanded to include a small studio for Serafina's foundation work and a corner for Maya's ever-growing art projects. Years passed. Maya, now a teenager with her mother's artistic talent and her father's steady hands, stood in the bustling, sunlit hall of the Havenwood Community Center, sketching the faces of her neighbors. The center had become the heart of the town, a testament to what was possible when resources were guided by purpose. Liam and Serafina watched her from a distance, their hands intertwined, the lines around their eyes speaking of shared laughter and a deep, abiding peace. He was no longer just a carpenter, and she was no longer just a CEO. They were partners, in life and in work, their two disparate worlds having merged into a single beautiful tapestry. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked, his voice a low rumble against the happy noise of the center. "The glass towers? The boardrooms?" She smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "I have a better view here," she said, her gaze fixed on her family, on the community they had helped nurture. "I thought my legacy would be a company," she continued, her voice soft. "But I was wrong. Their legacy wasn't Kronos Corp or a foundation. It was this. It was the sound of a child's laughter in a restored building, the sight of a town thriving, the quiet, unshakable knowledge that love, true love, wasn't about finding someone who fit perfectly into your life. It was about finding someone brave enough to help you build a new one, from the ground up, with honesty as the foundation, and kindness as the frame. The sad lady from the park bench was gone. In her place was a woman who had found her purpose, not in a balance sheet, but in the steadfast heart of a good man, and in the simple, profound act of building a life that was finally real.